all about the social entrepreneurship, and today's guest speaker is Norm from Venture Deli, and I'm going to pass it off.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Carlin. Thank you for the opportunity to do this webinar for you. It's something that I've been doing quite a bit actually over the last couple of years of running sessions like this for people that are either exposed to the concept of social entrepreneurship and are looking to start something of their own, or just are curious of what the field is and the opportunities that are available for it. So really today what I'm hoping to do is to give everyone that is attending a general sense of what social entrepreneurship is and some of the things that you should be considering whether you want to launch your own business as a social enterprise, some of the key business hurdles you need to be thinking through, and really how you design an opportunity that's attractive to the marketplace. So that's sort of a quick overview of what I'm hoping to get out of today's session. A little bit about myself. I've been working in the field of social entrepreneurship now for approaching a decade, actually. Really at the beginning stages when social entrepreneurship wasn't even a thing. It wasn't a term that we were using in Canada. I worked with a number of consulting firms, one of which was Aveneues, which was one of the first consulting firms that actually created a practice area specifically for social enterprise. And this is back in sort of the mid-2000s. From there, moved to Mars. So for the groups that are, for the individuals that are Toronto-based, you'll, I'm sure, know what Mars is. I was the social entrepreneur in residence there back in 2010, working specifically with entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, anyone that wanted to create a really, really cool business idea that had a social purpose to it. I saw and chatted with every single one of them. And my job there was to literally advise them on how they could get their businesses off the ground. I'm also a professor at the University of Toronto and the York University Schulich School of Business, where I teach social entrepreneurship both at the master's level and at the undergraduate level. I've been doing that for about 4 years now. And I launched my own company back in 2010 called Venture Deli. So Venture Deli, just as a quick little promo, is what we do is we launch companies that matter to the world. And so what that means is that we support entrepreneurs, whether they are individuals or individuals within other charities or nonprofits or even for-profits that are looking to create a blended model. And we'll talk all about this during the webinar. Created a blended model between social and financial purpose, and they need help in getting that business off the ground. So our services are geared towards that, and we're doing that for about 2 years now. So just a quick background of myself, and as I mentioned, I've been working in the space for quite a bit of time. So what I want to do actually now is to start talking about what social entrepreneurship is, and really what this slide is showing is a brainstorm that a group that I was affiliated with back in the day were starting to ruminate over, figuring out exactly what social entrepreneurship or enterprise is. And I won't belabor it, but if Carla can make the slides available for people after the webinar, you can look at this in more detail or what have you, and I'm more than happy to share this material. But really, it's a space now in Canada that is growing exponentially, in my opinion, on a quarterly basis, let alone a yearly basis. Every single day now, I see more and more people, young people, business professionals, senior executives within for-profit and nonprofit organizations that are moving to try to do something within the field of social entrepreneurship. So it's an extremely exciting time for people that are looking to get into the space. And what I want to do to begin is to start talking about what social entrepreneurship actually is. So I'll spend a good chunk of the webinar starting to talk about sort of definitions. And I don't want to have it as a boring kind of conversation around what definitions are, but I will kind of at least give one, and I'll stop at that point. And it's a super simple one based off of Wikipedia. What we're trying to do is to create a social venture that is focusing on social change. Now, what that means is it's some type of business-oriented vehicle, so you're selling a product or service in the marketplace, but the act of doing that is creating some type of follow-on social benefit. Okay? So I'll talk in a few minutes about some archetypes of how you can categorize what a social enterprise is. But the core of it is applying a business practice to a social or environmental cause. So the core of it is that. Now, one of the other ways that I like to think about social entrepreneurship is the blending of financial and social together. So what you see in this slide here is a high-level diagram of the what I use the business model generation canvas. It was something created by an individual called Alexander Osterwalder about I think it was now 10 years ago, and it's becoming one of the go-to or the gold standards in helping early-stage companies to get off the ground. And we can speak more about what business modeling is a little bit later in the conversation. But basically what a business model is how you spend and how you make money at the core of it. Now, in the traditional space, that works perfectly well. But say you're an individual that wants to affect some type of social or environmental cause. Well, how do you infuse that social principle into the act of making and spending money? And that's sort of the core of what we're talking about when we talk about social enterprise. And really there are, in my opinion, three distinguishing factors that separate an entrepreneur from a social entrepreneur. And that falls into three different categories. The motive of the individual, the intent or the thing that individual is trying to do, and the permanence of social mandate in the organization itself. So motive, intent, and permanence. Three key themes. And I'll give some examples of what I mean by that. So for the attendees, you might have heard about the Pepsi Refresh Project. This was an initiative by Pepsi a few years back. And for people that don't know the backstory, what they did, I think this was in 2009, if I'm not mistaken, Pepsi was planning to create a campaign or an advertisement for the Super Bowl. And it was going to cost them several $1 million to do so. And someone in their marketing department said, well, why would we dump all this money on a 30-second commercial? Why don't we actually create some type of change campaign? So they created Pepsi Refresh, which was essentially a grant-making program where people came up with really, really cool, socially, environmentally innovative ideas. They posted it on this platform, and then the crowd, the market would say to them, this idea is great. It would filter up to the top ideas, and then you would get grants provided, or Pepsi would issue grants to those participants. So it was going great for a while, but then when you try to think of what the motive is of that entity, is the motive of Pepsi at the time to create some type of social change, like really, genuinely, or were they trying to benefit the brand of Pepsi? Right? What was the exact motive of that company? And I would fall into the line of the latter. Right? So you're trying to actually create brand recognition, really a corporate social responsibility campaign, nothing more than that. Well, the intent for Pepsi, of course, because their core business is selling pop, their intent is to get people to drink more pop. Okay? The intent really wasn't to create the social change that was happening with the people that received the grants, but really the intent was to increase their consumption of their core product. And in terms of permanence, well, Pepsi Refresh essentially ceased to exist. Just last year, a few months ago, they quietly decided to cancel the actual Pepsi Refresh project. So when you think of social change, well, change means that something is going to be, from this point forward, fundamentally different than the way before. Well, with Pepsi, because it's every single year, new people would apply for grants, really that change, that the permanency of their desire to be socially motivated stopped. Right? They really were only able to do it for 2 or 3 years. And the core reason is because it wasn't fundamental to Pepsi's business model. Right? Pepsi's business model, again, how you make and how you spend money, is to sell pop in exchange for cash. It does nothing to their brand to be able to be socially motivated, or very, very little. And we can talk about this cause marketing and things like that. But at the core, that's basically how Pepsi approached it. Now, on the flip side, for individuals that don't know who this person is, but this individual is Muhammad Yunus. And for the group that doesn't know who Muhammad Yunus is, he was an individual that started something called the Grameen Bank. And this was started back in I believe it was in the 60s, but it could have been in the early 70s, where Mr. Yunus in Bangladesh was noticing that individuals, in order for them to start up a small business, and by small business I mean quite literally, a person with a fishing rod, in order for them to get that equipment, they would have to they couldn't apply to a bank to get that money because banks were only really issued, at $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 levels, but someone only really needed $20 or $50 to buy their equipment. No one could give them that kind of cash, especially someone that was in abject poverty. So Muhammad Yunus said, well, this is kind of crazy. How about I just start giving people or lending people $20, $50 loans? And so he started the whole concept of microfinance. And it literally started with one woman that he basically loaned $20 to, and then she paid back that $20 a few months later. And so when we look at a model like Grameen, what are we thinking of? Well, the motive for Muhammad Yunus was not to sell a product or a service per se, or something that was separate from a social mission. His motive was to help people. And in particular, that first woman that he helped was the spark of a larger campaign to create this microfinancing piece. Well, his intent, if you think of, again, the model that we're talking about, the intent is to help, in Bangladesh at the time, women to launch their own small businesses. And that was really the goal. So the money that is put into microloans helps, in this case, a woman set up her own small farm. In other cases, a fishing business, $20, $50 loans. And the permanence of the model is there. So this has been going on now for about 50 years, 60 years. It's there right now. The microfinance community is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there is no way that an individual like this gentleman that you see on the screen here will ever get a loan, because this Grameen Bank is focused on individuals that are in abject poverty that need only very, very small sums of money. So the Grameen Bank will never be a situation, will never be an organization that would lend $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 amounts to rich white men, basically. So if you think of that construct, well, how permanent is the social change in your model? If Grameen started to lend to people like this, what would happen to Grameen Bank? Would they actually be able to still exist? Would they lose all of their credibility? Would customers still come to them? So a quick sort of construct of how you want to think about this is in that kind of a vein. So and then going back to the idea of motivation. So when we think of the motivation, if you think of just a regular entrepreneur, oftentimes their motivation could be external to themselves or to any other individual, right? Like, I want to create a new product that I think is really cool and I want to sell it. Well, for the social entrepreneur, really that motivation tends to be experiential, right? So on the slide here, you'll see a couple of images. An individual, Ray Anderson, who, if you have time after the webinar, you should Google and watch some videos on him. He actually passed away last year, but what Ray Anderson did, he worked with a company called Interface, and he was the CEO and the founder of that company. And he was asked to respond to this movement around environmental concern back a number of decades ago. And he was at a loss because he was running Interface Carpets, a carpet manufacturing company, without any regard for environmental protection. It wasn't really a mandate because his focus, again, when we think of business models, is selling carpets and making money in that vein. Well, he had what he called an epiphanal moment, an epiphanal experience, where he came across a number of inputs and said to him, well, the world is really going in a bad direction. And it's companies like mine that are causing the world to become almost inhabitable. And that experience, the realization that he had that he was part of the problem of making the planet a bad place, said to himself, well, I have to change fundamentally the way the interface carpet works. And so he turned that traditional for-profit making business into one of the cleanest, eco-friendly carpet manufacturers on the planet. And not only that, but he himself was an advocate for this idea of blending social and financial value, or in his case, environmental value, into his business. Another individual on this slide, you'll notice Jeff Skoll, founder of eBay. Jeff started the Skoll Foundation that some of you might know out of the UK in association with Oxford University. But before he launched eBay or the Skoll Foundation, his story, again, was very much experiential. He had individuals in his life that connected, that said to him that I need to make a difference in the world, and the way I'm going to make a difference in the world is to create a company that's profitable and then use those profits to philanthropically inspire change. So the motivation for social entrepreneurship is integral to understanding who a social entrepreneur is and what their enterprises are there to serve. So to continue to make this distinction, because it is kind of key for me, comparing the traditional entrepreneur to the social entrepreneur, well, there are really four categories for this. We have the motivation category. So again, here we're speaking about the intent as being experienced, or the motivation being experiential. For the traditional entrepreneur, we're talking about people that are seeking pure profit, right? So you start up any type of for-profit business without any regard for social. Your goal is to be rich. When we look at second mode of understanding entrepreneurship, traditional entrepreneurship, we think of innovation. So for innovation, what we're talking about is someone that is inventing something new, right? There's a new service or product that is geared to filling a gap in the marketplace. There's an invention. Resourcefulness is a key piece as well. For resourcefulness, what we're talking about is someone who's able to scramble around and find all of the resources, financial, human, physical resources that they need in order to create their product or their service. And then risk-taking, putting your money down and saying, I'm going to stake my claim that my business is going to work. And if it doesn't work, then I'm going to go bankrupt, or I'm going to close my shop. When we look at the social entrepreneur, each of those categories, motivation, innovation, resourcefulness, and risk-taking, are there, but they're there in a slightly different way. So when we look at motivation as an example, well, again, it's not just money, but it's some connection to a community, right? The experiential part of being a social entrepreneur. You want to make change to some community, to some environmental situation that you find distressful, right, or inequitable. In innovation, what we talk about is not just innovation in creating a new product or service, but innovation in what we call resiliency, right? So there's a community that's in distress, and without us in that community to create that change, that community will continue to be in distress. So we want to flip that and say, let's find a way to get that community to be self-reliant, to be resilient on its own without external help. And that's a key piece. It's a piece that all social entrepreneurs, whenever you hear them speak or when you talk, they're all trying to create some type of resiliency in their communities. They all essentially, in a way, want to go out of business because if they're successful, their communities are resilient and they wouldn't necessarily be needed anymore. In resourcefulness, usually in the traditional model, entrepreneurs tend to be inclusive or only wanting to share with a very, very small group of people. Right? So if you've got this new invention, you don't want to tell too many people about it because you don't want people to steal your idea. Well, in the social entrepreneurship space, because we're talking about changing a system, changing a group in society, changing an environmental situation, really the only way that you can do this is by collaborating. So instead of focusing specifically on competition, we talk about getting other groups involved in working with you to create that social change. So this could be as formal as a joint venture, or it could be a campaign that you might do with another company or nonprofit, or just a willingness to work together. So you'll find way more of that in the social entrepreneurship space than you'll ever find in the traditional entrepreneurship space, I find. And then risk-taking, finally, just to close this one off, is really more about the personal risk to your reputation that you take by being a social entrepreneur. And I see this on a daily basis where entrepreneurs come to me and say, I've got this idea to make this change, but nobody believes in me. No one thinks that this idea is going to work. Whether it's too ambitious or it's too big of a challenge that I'm trying to solve, people don't think it's a reasonable thing for me to do. And that idea of unreasonableness, I often say back, is an actual asset. Because if you don't have that feeling that a system is screwed up and that you need to come in to make that change, then that change will never happen. So you need to be that unreasonable person, and the risk to your personal reputation is much stronger than, say, an entrepreneur that launches a new, a purely for-profit generating product or service, where the biggest risk is on the cash side. Okay? Like I've put money in, and I might lose. There's reputational risk as well, but for the social entrepreneur, it's much, much stronger because of the nature of what they're trying to do. So there's a couple of pieces, and I won't belabor the rest of it because I will make the slides available. But again, we're talking about systems change, systems thinking. We're talking about finding methods of creating profit in places where profit is hard to create. So for those that might work in the international development community, there are opportunities. There's a sector called the bottom of the pyramid. So groups that are in the same vein as what Green Bank is trying to capture, the low income or individuals that are in poverty, finding methods to actually monetize some of those some of the opportunities that they see in that space, and then having some type of ethical impetus. So there's a feeling that you have to do something in order to fix the situation that you see. If you don't do it, no one else will. And a lot of those mentalities are found in the social enterprise space. So that's a crash, my 5-10 minute background of what social entrepreneurship is and how you distinguish it from regular entrepreneurship. And when I use the term entrepreneurship, I'm talking about an individual or a group of individuals that want to make change. I'm going to now talk about the social enterprise side. So what a social enterprise is the physical manifestation of what a social entrepreneur does. So a company or a nonprofit or a charity that has a social and a financial mission blended together. So I'm going to walk through a couple of archetypes, but before I do so, I really want to reinforce the idea of a blending of social and financial. So again, recall that an enterprise, a social enterprise, is one that is acting in the marketplace. So they're a product or a service they want to sell, but in the act of selling that product or service or making that product, they're creating some type of social benefit. Okay? product itself, the thing that they're actually selling. Okay? So you'll see an example here, Zipcar. Some people might challenge me of whether Zipcar falls into the equation. So I think it does. For those that might not know what Zipcar is, it's essentially a car sharing initiative. So you can get Zipcars parked all over metropolitan cities, and you can use an app or online platform to essentially rent that car at any time you want. So the idea, the reason why it's socially purposeful is for a number of reasons. It's the sharing of assets instead of the purchasing of assets. So there's theoretically less cars that are being manufactured. There's increased availability of transportation to people that might not be able to afford to buy a full car. Right? They have a driver's license, but they can't afford $10,000, $20,000 to purchase a car, but they can rent a car from time to time. And then the idea of collaborating with someone else. This idea of Zipcar falls into the subcategory of collaborative consumption. So it's better to share resources than to just own and isolate those resources. Right? So one Zipcar could be on the road for 24 hours in a day versus 3 cars all being parked in a parking lot throughout that 24-hour period. So product-based. Every time that someone rents a Zipcar, they are creating that social value, right? Because it's theoretically one less other car on the road, et cetera, et cetera. So the second type I want to talk about is the employment-based. And what you'll see on the screen here is an example out of this World Cafe. It's associated with CAMH. For those that are outside of Toronto, it's the Canadian Association of Mental Health, I think it is. I can't remember the name of the specific name. But they work with people that have mental illness. And so what out of this World Cafe is a cafe that employs people with mental illness affiliated with the CAMH hospital. So it's employment-based because the social innovation or the social outcome that's being generated is through the employment of a group of individuals that would otherwise not be able to get a job, or it would be extremely tough for them to be able to get a job. So if I were to break it down, this group, the employment-based, the majority of social enterprises that are out there are the employment-based type of business. Okay? So a group that's specifically looking to hire a population that would have barriers to employment. The third archetype is what we call the accessibility-based. So the accessibility-based is really the archetype where there's a certain product or service that's out there that is out of reach for a certain population, right, because of the portability. So the accessibility-based is where the price of that product is reduced sufficiently enough, or there are methods by which a group that couldn't access a particular product or service can now get access to that product or service, and ideally by purchasing it. So here, what you're basically doing is you're having formerly what you would consider like a client or like a group that would be a recipient of a social service. Well, now they can actually become a customer of a service in some cases. So accessibility-based would be the third type. And the final is what we call the tethered model. So for those of you that are, say, working in a nonprofit or a charity that already exists, oftentimes what happens, and really in Canada, a lot of the origins of social enterprise happen in this way, where a charity decides, my revenues, my income from our funders is not stable any longer. We want to be able to create an opportunity to generate regular, unrestricted funds so that we can support our core charitable offerings. Well, how do we set up a separate business that can funnel some of its profits back to the charity? And really, the origins, a lot of the early social enterprises in Toronto and in Canada fell into this category. So it's tethered because there's a contractual agreement between the parent, the charity, and the entity that's created the business. That business could have a social mandate to it, or it could simply just be a cash transaction. Right? So some of you might have heard of Free the Children and an organization called Me to We. That would be a tethered model where Me to We sells clothing, and the profit from that exchange, half of that profit goes back to Free the Children, the parent charity. So you can imagine across these four archetypes, there are different ways of understanding how to infuse social purpose into a business. Right? So all of the examples that I've given are, again, groups that are selling something in the marketplace, whether it's a product or a service, they're generating social value because of that transaction. Now, it's not easy to really understand where the boundaries are, where the lines cross between a social business and a regular business. So just as an example, and I'm going to ask Carla to kind of go step by step here with the slide, and be sure this was okay. But if we were to use this as an example, we've got a retailer that sells goods or services at an affordable rate, so that it falls into our accessibility category. They also employ individuals with various employment, and in this case it would be the elderly population that is struggling to make an income. And they set for themselves very, very ambitious goals. So they set for themselves a goal of creating or selling green products to reduce by 95% their waste instead of going into a landfill, to go through a recycling program, and then to have all of their stores or all of their sites powered by renewable energy. So, and I use this example in the classroom, and I use this example in all of my talks, because I always poll the group, how many people would think that this would fall into the category of accessibility-based or perhaps employment-based social enterprise. And I usually get a 50-50 split of people saying, oh yeah, this is totally fit, this makes complete sense. And others say, well, I'm not really sure, I can get a little bit more information. And then I go and Carla can do the next click. Oh, it's actually the Walmart business model. So Walmart, if you look at some data beside, just in up until 2010, Walmart has raised $115 million for a charitable purpose. They sell well over 1,000 products that are approved by various environmental standards across the world, and they've created hundreds and hundreds of jobs in Canada. But the average person would say, well, there's no way that Walmart is a social enterprise. A, it's gigantic. B, do they really care about the social outcome? But if you look at it from a gross numbers perspective, 150 million, if I were to ask any one of you, would you be happy if your organization was able to generate $150 million in charitable benefit over a 15-year period? I'm sure every one of you would say, oh, absolutely, I'd be there in a second. So there's a fine line that one has to kind of walk in order to say, well, is this actually a social enterprise or is this not? And again, the way that I like to think about this, and the way that I would love for you guys to think about this, is to think again about those three key pillars that I mentioned before. What is the motivation of the entrepreneur, or in this case, the senior management team? Are they truly motivated to generate change? Are they only motivated for financial return? What is the intent of the business? Right? So is the business purely to just sell products or services, or is it to sell a product or service in the vein of a product-based social enterprise, accessibility-based, employment-based, or a tethered model? Right? And then how permanent is that model? Right? So with Walmart, tomorrow they could decide, oh, I don't want to get any more money away from charity. We're going to maximize our profits. Maybe our business isn't going so well, so we're going to stop doing all of our charitable stuff. And they could absolutely do that, and it's not going to affect the bottom line. If anything, it'll make them more money. But if a social enterprise were to try to take away their social mission, so the Out of This Way Cafe example that I gave out of the candidates, if they stopped employing individuals with mental illness, it would be extremely difficult created in the first place, it would be extremely tough for them to stop adding that social mission into the business. So, we can go through another example. We'll go through this one fairly quickly because I guess people will be able to guess it. But again, thinking about a cafe that offers approximately 84% of their coffee as ethically sourced, where they support farmers that sell fair trade coffee, and they actually provide loans to coffee growers, where they're trying to generate 100% of their infrastructure or their cups and things like that as renewable or recyclable. Would this kind of a coffee shop, in the same vein as the Out of This Way Cafe, would they be a social enterprise? Well, this one is the Starbucks model, right? But again, thinking about where is that line crossed? Well, if I look at Starbucks and I say, well, yeah, I don't think that they would be really socially motivated, but 10% of all global trade, sale of fair trade coffee comes from Starbucks. If you could take 100 small independent coffee retailers that sell 100% of the coffee as fair trade, and it wouldn't even approach what Starbucks is able to sell. But Starbucks only sells about 2 to 3% of their coffee as purely fair trade. The vast majority of their coffee, it could be ethical, but it's not fair trade. So it's really, really hard to think. But again, if you were in Starbucks' position, how do you actually create the ability to sell 10% of the world's fair trade coffee supply? Well, you need to have tens of thousands of stores worldwide that sell this coffee. So it's a fine line again that these groups cross. So if I were to just have a really quick summary of what I feel social enterprise does and does not constitute, well, if we look at this chart, we've got here social enterprise as a business line. Okay, so again, we're selling something versus a fundraising strategy. Okay, so if you start up a charity or a nonprofit and the goal is to be charitable only, that's what we call the give mentality, right? You're going to raise money from funders or from donors, and you're going to run some type of program or service in the community that really has no mechanism of generating a financial return. Right? You're not selling anything to anybody. You're giving things, right? Like a food bank as an example. So selling something is a key distinguishing factor. The dependence on restricted funds really, it's a gray zone, but most social enterprises don't rely on external funding to support their business. If they do, I would define that as more of a program of a charity versus a social enterprise per se. Right? So the idea, because you're selling stuff in the marketplace, you should be independent of a funder or a group. That's the goal of being self-sufficient or sustainable versus dependent on what we call restricted funds. For the group, for the people on the call that know what restricted funds are, it's basically someone that a funder, like a government or a foundation, that says you can only use this money in these very, very specific ways. Right? If you're a customer to a company, say like you're a customer at Starbucks, you don't tell Starbucks how to use your $4 for your latte. They can use that money in whatever way they choose. So that's the key distinguishing factor. Also, a social enterprise is a going concern. So that means that it's continuing to operate, right, versus a one-off activity. Right? So a lot of charities, they may run a bake sale or a conference or some type of one-off event. Maybe they run it once every year, right? So it's ongoing in that kind of a way. But it's not a day-to-day business that is making and selling stuff. That's a key distinguishing factor, right? Because charities have been running one-off activities all the time to try to raise money. But it's not the same idea because it's not a going concern. And then, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, social enterprises offer service or value to two different groups. They offer to groups that I call clients and to customers. Okay? Now, again, I'll talk about what that means in a few minutes. Whereas a charity really only provides services to clients only. Okay, so recipients of your service versus a customer. And then finally, social enterprise is something that will take time. You have to have patience with it. Like any business, it's going to take time to get set up, to start finding customers and to start working, versus a mentality that you can get a social enterprise off the ground and really quickly and make a whole lot of money right away. It just doesn't happen. You need to have that patience. So I'll quickly go through the distinguishment, the things that distinguish a traditional business from a social enterprise. I've talked about them already a little bit, but just to kind of reinforce it, a traditional business has a goal, and often that goal is for financial return, whereas a social enterprise, their goal is this idea of blended value. Okay, so here there is both a financial return, and one thing I do want to make clear is that it's perfectly okay for a social entrepreneur to want to make money, right? So do not feel that it has to be charitable for you to be able to do this. You can make money, but you're also generating value for your community, whether it's a specific population, whether it's an environmental benefit. The product or service, again, for the traditional business, really just the cheapest and quickest way I can make a product is the mentality, versus in a social enterprise where you're infusing social across what we call the value chain. Okay, so for the people on the call that are business folks, you'll know what value chain is. You're talking about, all the way from raw material to finished product to delivery of that product, et cetera, et cetera. Well, all across that process of making your product and selling it, can I add value, social value across that, right? The transaction side, every business has a transaction, right? For the traditional business, we're talking about a customer, and in business language, we talk about a two-way exchange of value, right? So a customer gives you money in exchange for your product or your service. In the social enterprise space, you have that group, so you still have customers. You have to have them, right? Or else it's purely a charity. So you have a customer group that gives as a two-way exchange of value. But in the social enterprise space, you also have a one-way exchange of value, and that is typically to a client group. Okay, so the client group is that group that is the beneficiary of the social value. Okay, so if you think of a food bank as an example, I give a basket of goods to a person that can't afford it. They don't pay me anything because they can't afford it, but they can say thank you or whatever, but they're essentially exchanging in a one-way with me, right? Because I give them a good and service, and then they just take that good and service and benefit from it. Okay. And the final piece is the legal form. And a point of caution here, I often have people ask me, is there a specific legal form for social enterprise? And the answer is, well, not necessarily. So you don't have to have a social, you don't have to, there is no specific legal form for social enterprise today. It's basically, you either register as a for-profit or a non-profit, or perhaps as a cooperative or a sole proprietorship. In some provinces in Canada, they're starting to create a specific legal entity for social enterprise. British Columbia has one that's beginning. In Ontario, it's still being developed, but there's talk of creating one in Ontario. The United Kingdom has had one called the Community Interest Corporation, the KIC, for the last for quite a few years. But there is no one in Ontario today that we can use as an official legal form for social enterprise. So that's a high-level overview of social enterprise per se. And one of the key things that I think you might have inferred as I've been talking through this is this concept of tension. And in a traditional business, there's one goal, and that goal is to make a whole whack of money, right? In the social enterprise space, well, I have to balance my desire to make a whole whack of money with my desire to generate social value. So in that, you can imagine if you're making strategic decisions on how the company goes forward, well, in some cases, you might have to balance. You might have to say reduce your financial targets because you have to spend more money to achieve your social aims, right? So out of the Slate Cafe as an example, there's added expense of hiring and training people with mental illness and higher turnover and all that kind of stuff, versus a company like Starbucks that has the most efficient way of managing their human resources. There's a tension built in there, right? How much do you focus on the social value versus the financial value, et cetera, et cetera. And you can imagine other methods by which tension falls into the space of social enterprise. How much do you focus on selling something versus delivering a social value? So the next thing that I want to talk about, and kind of to close off, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions, is the idea of business modeling. And I've mentioned that a few times now, but one of the things that is key to whatever you want to do within the social enterprise space is that your business model, the way you make and you spend money, it absolutely has to be viable economically. Okay? If it doesn't make sense financially in the long run, you'll never be able to have the social value in the long term. So that's a sort of a point of caution. Now, a couple of, I guess, steps to identify whether you have an idea that you think can be viable. In sort of business jargon, we talk about finding a pain point. So again, imagine you're sitting there trying to brainstorm whether you want to start up a social business, a social enterprise, or whether you want to maybe infuse some of these principles into the organization or company you currently work for. Well, it always goes back to what do your customers need? What gap in the marketplace are they suffering through, right? So again, if you don't have a clearly defined pain point, and your service is not a need to have but a nice to have, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to be financially viable. And for the people again that have worked in the business community, you know all about this. This is the way the business has operated for centuries. But in the social enterprise community, because it really originated in a lot of ways from the social sector, where the mentality was more about soliciting donations and that kind of stuff to pay for services that no one was going to provide, like the business community was going to provide. This idea of creating a pain point and servicing that pain point is a key piece. And again, the idea of identifying that pain first before you actually start creating a product. And I can't belabor this point more. I would say the majority of people that I speak to or that come to me to talk about their social enterprise idea, usually what I hear is, I've created this really, really cool idea. I have this really cool product that I want to sell. Can you help me think through who might want to buy it from me? And when I hear that, or when I sit down with that person, I always think, well, if you don't know who your customer is and what they want, it's going to be extremely hard for you to actually convince someone to buy your thing. And usually the companies or the organizations that are most successful have studied the need in the marketplace first and then designed a product to service that need. So product first, pain second. So, and a method for figuring out how to identify that customer pain is what we call entity mapping. So here is just an example, a little pictorial of what an entity map is. But basically what you do in this process is you put yourself into the environment of your customer, right? So, and by that I literally mean the physical environment that customer is experiencing, right? And so you say, well, what does my customer base see in the market? Okay, so let's say you wanted to set up a cafe. Well, if they walk into my cafe, what do they need to see, right? And I usually give the example of Tim Hortons versus Starbucks, right? In one case, it's a relaxing environment. In another case, it's a highly stressful environment. What do you hear when you walk into a Starbucks versus a Tim Hortons, right? You hear chatter, conversation. You hear nice music. You hear coffee machines working. at Tim Hortons, you hear like a crackly radio. You don't hear a lot of nice music, all that kind of stuff. So what do you say when you walk into one or the other, right? I want a double-double or versus I want a latte. And then what do you think and what do you feel as you go through? So you can imagine what you're trying to do here. You're trying to figure out, well, how do I want my customer to experience my solution, and how are they currently experiencing the world without that solution? So it's a very, very powerful technique just to get you to think and start to talk to people, talk to customers, talk to people in your networks to figure out exactly what kind of things people are looking for. So, and I'll leave it at that, and I'll come back to the idea of business models, right? So, again, I'm giving a picture of what the business model canvas is, but essentially it's comprised of 9 categories, 9 boxes, and each of those are the core components of how a business runs. Right? So you've got a customer segment, you've got a product or a value proposition that you're selling, you have channels, right, and relationships. I won't kind of belabor them. You can kind of read them on the slide either right now or if you download the slides afterwards. But really going through this checklist and answering these questions around what my business is trying to do, right? So do I have a customer base? Do they have a pain point not satisfied? Are there enough customers for me to attract? What am I offering to them? What specifically am I selling? Is it compelling to them? Is it alleviating that pain point? The channels and relationships, what that basically means is how do I physically give my product to somebody? How do I deliver that product to them? And then how do they relate back to me, right? So you walk into a Starbucks, the channel is the store itself, because that's how I get the coffee, and I relate to the barista. I relate to the brand of Starbucks, to the couches, to the environment. The remaining components are the revenue streams and cost structure. So again, how do I make and how do I spend money? What's the cash flow? How do I price my business, my offering? Key resources and activities. What are the assets of the company? Right? And there are pieces, human assets, physical assets, and what activities do I do that generates that value? So do I run if I want to set up a coffee shop, I need to know how to make coffee. I need to know how to train people to make coffee. I need people that can clean the store, that can make the store look really, really pretty. So there are things like that fall into the key activities. And then key partners. So again, by partners you can imagine, do I need other organizations that come in to help me? Do I need investors to come and help me, perhaps? Or other kinds of things. Do I need maybe at the beginning some government support to get the business up and down before it becomes profitable? So again, the business modeling process, and I talk quite a bit about business modeling as the core piece of trying to figure out how a business works. But I've given here just a quick example. If I were to use Starbucks as my example, how you would go about filling the business model canvas. So you can again go back to this as an example. So I won't belabor this point. But one of the things that I do want to emphasize is that you really need to be an alchemist here. So what that means is that when you build a business model, it's not a plan, it's not a business plan. Okay, so you're not writing a 50-page document. What you're doing is just creating a one-pager that highlights all these components. Well, if one thing in my model doesn't work, I have to scrap that thing and then put a new thing in its place. And I continually iterate over time based on what the marketplace is telling me. Okay, so that's a key tip for you. So just to kind of wrap off, I want to give a quick sort of couple of other tips for people that want to start up a social enterprise. Well, one thing that you can do to start to generate ideas or identify readiness is to do what I call an idea jam. So the steps are listed out here. I won't go over it too much, but basically the idea is you get a whole group of people that come from completely different sectors, business, like career paths, people from the for-profit world, from the non-profit world, maybe from the government world, put them all into a room, give them a couple of ideas to seed a conversation, and then you give them 45 minutes to an hour to just brainstorm how to make it work. And it's a great way, I find, of helping people to think through some of their ideas and whether there's actual viability. So idea jamming, it's a great technique that I like to use. And then I have a checklist as well. So again, there are the questions that I listed above in a few slides earlier. Here again, answer these questions, and it'll give you a good start to whether you want to start an enterprise. So how do you make money? How do you capitalize the business? So how do you get that first investor in? How much risk are you willing to take? And how much flexibility do you need? Okay, by flexibility, you need, if you have a funder, they're going to be dictating a lot of things to you, or do you just want to go it alone and bootstrap it, or find another investor that's willing to give you more flexibility and freedom? And then the final thing, just before we go to the question piece, is this idea of zeal. And it's something that a colleague of mine talked about quite a bit, and I've adopted it in a lot of my talks, is this idea that if you're not 100% passionate about what you want to do, it's going to be extremely tough for you to overcome the down points. The life of an entrepreneur is a roller coaster of emotion. And the highs are awesome, but the lows are awful. And if you don't have the zeal to continue on, it's going to be really, really tough to get out of those valleys and up over the hill. So with that last piece, I will say thank you and see if we have any questions.
Well, thank you very much. That was great. I always learn a lot at all of these webinars, so it's amazing. And actually, it's making me realize that maybe, in fact, just being a social enterprise is good business.